Well, I'll give you the 30-second bio. I'm the second oldest of a family of 10 children. I grew up in Laval, north of Montreal. I was actually born in Ottawa because my parents were living in Wrightville, Gatineau at the time. And I went to McGill Law School. I got 2 degrees there. And since then, I've been involved actively in community life. I've been on the boards of many different charities over the years. And before I came into federal politics, I was the Minister of Sustainable Development, Environment and Parks for the province of Quebec, a cabinet position that I held for several years after having spent 9 years in opposition, including 5 as Deputy Leader of in the House of the Opposition. I bring a lot of public administration experience to the job as well, having chaired one of Quebec's largest regulatory agencies before even going into elected politics. I've now been elected 3 times for the NDP in the province of Quebec. In 2007, I won a by-election in the Liberal stronghold of Outremont, and in 2008 general election, I became the first NDPer elected in a general election in the province of Quebec, and I was re-elected along with 58 other NDP MPs on May 2nd of this year.
What were the issues that initially brought you into politics?
Well, since the very beginning, I've always been involved socially, and that's my background. In school, we were involved in a group in high school that had us involved with very poor communities in and around our neighborhoods and in Montreal. We also got involved in other social causes over the years. At the time when I went to cabinet, because you had to resign from your different community posts, you weren't allowed to be on any other boards. I was on the board of directors of the Montreal Rural School for the Deaf, something called Opération Enfant Soleil, which is the large hospital charity, and I was on the St. Patrick's Society. So I've always been involved deeply in the community. That interest in public policy, I started my very first job in government was as a lawyer at the Direction Générale des Affaires Législatives of the Quebec Justice Department, so in the legislative drafting branch. So that idea of having ideas, putting them into the form of a law and having them become part of the reality of our social legal fabric, that's always been what I've been interested in, and that's exactly what I want to do now, is make sure that the wonderful ideas that the NDP's put forward over the years, that sometimes we've managed to get through by becoming partners with a governing party, well, we'll actually be able to put through in systematic order this time around, because we'll be the governing party.
You were a Quebec Liberal and a Quebec Liberal minister. You tell us about why you quit the government.
There was a development proposal in a provincial park called Mount Orford Provincial Park. There was a plan to give over those public lands that were supposed to be held in perpetuity for future generations to private developers to build condos. And I refused to sign the order in council. That was the second big tussle. Another one had to do with a methanization plant across from Quebec City called Ravasca, which I had refused to even allow to go through the permitting process. That's how dangerous it was. By the way, that one's never going to be built, and they had to reverse the decision that my successor took on Orford to approve it. But at the time, they tried to remove me from that job and put me in another position on a question of principle. I simply resigned from cabinet, finished out my term. That was in 2006. In 2007, I finished off my term. And in the meantime, Jack and I had started working together, and he asked me to become his Quebec lieutenant and to run in Outremont. Everyone thought we were a bit crazy, but it worked. And since then, Quebec has really started to connect with the NDP on the level of values. They realized that even for non-sovereignists who have been voting for the Bloc to vote for a progressive party, they realized that the NDP is now a viable force in Quebec. So a lot of people came to us in the last election.
Pretty big journey from the Quebec Liberals to the federal NDP. Has it been a difficult transition for you?
Important point, and a lot of people in the rest of Canada forget that there's no provincial NDP in Quebec. It's the only province that doesn't have a provincial NDP. There's no provincial Conservatives in Quebec. There's one big federalist tent, which is the Liberal Party. And the dividing line is not social, it's not left-right in the classic sense. Each tent, the federalist one and the sovereignist one, accommodates left and right. So the current leader of the Quebec Liberals is a former Conservative leader, Jean Charest. But I had several colleagues in cabinet. One was Henri-François Gautrin, who sold me my first NDP card in '74 when I was a 19-year-old law student. He was the president of the NDP in Quebec, several-time candidate. And then he went over and became a Liberal and a Liberal cabinet minister. Françoise Gauthier had run under Ed Broadbent in Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean for the NDP. She became a Liberal cabinet minister as well. And Michel Bissonnette had been a candidate for the NDP as well, and he became the Speaker of the House under that government. So there's a strong tradition of accommodating left and right. Now that seems a bit odd when you're from other provinces where the battles take place like that. But again, the battle line is drawn completely differently in Quebec. So when you leave provincial politics and you're a federalist and you're coming to Ottawa, you're going to connect with the party that's closest to your values. And that's what the NDP was for me, and with Jack Layton especially, who always made it clear that the party was going to be run in one interest only, the public interest, and special interests would, have their place and their priority, but the only thing that would be on top in terms of priorities was the public interest.
So it wasn't a long journey.
No, it was a simple connection. In Quebec City, the files that you work on, I was an environmentist, so I was working with the progressive forces in Quebec, and I was close to them, and I worked with them a great deal.
Where would, as leader, where would you like to take the NDP? And where do you, and more fundamentally, how do you think the NDP needs to change?
One of the things that we were able to accomplish, thanks to the incredible vision and the hard work of Jack, I worked with him 5 years, shoulder to shoulder, across the province, connecting with people. And one of the things we learned is we had to reach beyond the base that would traditionally be the target group of the NDP. I remember when I arrived, there were two things that, that I had talked about in my first formal meeting. And I wanted to know why they always targeted and they would name certain specific groups in society, almost by class. And they said, well, that's our identifying language. That's the way we identify, and we want people in that group to identify with us. But I said, a lot of people in the middle class need help. The inequalities in our society that are increasing instead of decreasing, they're starting to hurt a lot of people, including the middle class. You don't target them. Well, it wasn't at the time, but now they're starting to understand that there could be a big approach in the NDP. We can call on progressives to vote for us and have a beautiful, open Canada that we knew we could have. The Liberals disappointed so many people with things like their signature on Kyoto, which meant nothing. They even admitted that it was a public relations stunt and when they signed it, and they went on to have the worst record in the world on greenhouse gas production. So that's one of the biggest issues of our time, is global warming and reduction of greenhouse gases. So if you actually want to do something about it other than just talk about it, vote for the NDP next time around. We've also got to be able to convince Canadians that the NDP is capable of providing prudent, competent public administration. So we've already got a team of really great, top-notch people, but we've got to recruit more and show this is a team actually capable of running a G7 country like Canada. There's still quite a lot of work to do to convince Canadians that the NDP can form a government. When we became the official opposition, that was the result of a numbers game. The second highest number of seats is the party that becomes the official opposition. So that's a state of fact. But becoming a government in waiting in the public's eye is a state of mind. We have to convince people after 4 years of hard work. And by the way, you gave the date at the beginning of this as October 19th, 2011. We are exactly 4 years away today. The next election is scheduled on October 19th, 2015. And we have 4 years to go beyond being simply the mathematical official opposition to becoming, in people's minds, the government in waiting, the people who can actually form the next government.
Can you point to signature policies that you think the NDP should be standing for that are going to bring in these new constituencies that aren't with
One of the things that we were able to do in the last election is to come up with a constitutional offer to take care of a retrospective problem involving Quebec's place in Canada. We didn't have to go through the Meach and Charlottetown type of mega process that that failed both times and resulted in a lot of disappointment. Concrete steps that can be taken to give real content to the recognition of Quebec's special place in Canada. On the other end of that spectrum, it's something prospective. We have to look at a systematic approach to sustainable development. When I was the Minister of Sustainable Development, Environment and Parks in Quebec, I was able to take very strong stands on things like preservation of wetlands because I understood that you had to walk the walk. You had to say the legislation is there, it's going to apply to everyone, irrespective of the size of the municipality or the influence of the corporation. And that was a very strong, consistent attitude I had. And it's the same attitude I had when I was regulating the professions in the public interest in the province of Quebec. I think that approach, looking at economic, ecological, and social aspects of every problem when you're the government, has to become systematic. We introduced legislation.
Is that different from how
it's not done in Ottawa. No, in Ottawa there's always been a piecemeal approach. There's no overarching approach to sustainable development. So if we were to bring in the type of legislation we did in Quebec, where all decisions have to be measured through that lens, and the public understands that that's always going to be the case, future generations will stop being the victims, as they are right now, of the conservative approach. Right now, young people are having the largest ecological, economic, and social debt in our history placed in their pack sacks, and they're being told by the Conservatives there's nothing they can do about it. Meanwhile, the way we're exploiting the tar sands, because no one's going to tell you we're going to stop extracting oil from the tar sands. But what we can do is start doing it responsibly, applying basic principles of sustainable development, internalization of costs, user pay, polluter pay. Because we're not internalizing the environmental costs, the Europeans are going to force us to, and they're going to keep the money. But on the other hand, we're bringing in an artificially high number of US dollars. It's called the Dutch disease. Holland went through that when they discovered gas. The manufacturing sector gets killed off as our dollar goes up, and it becomes increasingly difficult to export our own product. Right now, Canada is going through that type of Dutch disease. Since the Conservatives took power, we've lost over 400,000 good-paying manufacturing jobs, jobs that had enough of a salary to let a family live. More often than not, those jobs are being replaced by precarious, part-time, service sector jobs that don't pay as well and don't come with a pension. Now that, in the perspective of sustainable development, we think so often about the environment, but we forget about the social side. Young people today, when they come to retirement or when they're finishing their careers, if they've had no pension on their own to accumulate, who's going to have the ability to take care of them? Again, it's another future generation. The Conservatives love this approach of saying, don't go for a handout, bootstraps approach, be autonomous, live on your own. The problem is right now, we're being put in a situation where we're living off our grandchildren's credit card. And that's the irresponsibility in terms of intergenerational equity.
The arguments you make are strong policy-oriented arguments, but are they going to have the emotional gravity to pull that 5% of the population that voted for Harper in the last election that the NDP so badly needs to form government?
If you look at what we did in the province of Quebec, we talked consistently about these issues of sustainable development. Most people want to take that sort of approach. The Conservatives are still taking an archaic economic development versus protection of the environment approach. Most Canadians have gone beyond that. They understand that we have to be responsible, pay for what we're using now, and not continue leaving that sort of debt on the backs of future generations. I do a lot of colleges and universities and even high schools, and I know that young people get that. One of the tragedies that we're living right now is that a lot of 18 to 25-year-olds, indeed over 60%, don't vote. So I'll blame my generation for that they're not voting, because we haven't turned them on to politics enough, made them understand the importance of getting involved in the parliamentary and the voting and the political process. But they have turned off. They don't believe that we can do the work anymore, and they're involved in movements in the street, occupying and saying, do something about it. But we are the place where those things can get done. So we have to connect with them more. And the way to connect with them more is to make them understand that the decisions being taken here in Ottawa, or in Quebec City, or in Edmonton, or in Victoria, are affecting them. And to get them involved also in the political process. I'll never tell somebody not to be involved in civil society. As I mentioned earlier, I was always involved in social groups. But civil society can be a complement to. It can be, for you, very important. But if you're not also involved at some stage of the game in the political process, by taking a membership card in a party, by going to a meeting, by trying to help a candidate get elected, whatever the party is, I prefer to be the NDP, but whatever the party is, then there's a whole piece that's going to be missing. You're not going to be influencing the decisions that are going to have an influence on your life. And that's the problem.
Let's talk about the leadership race a bit. You declared last week in Montreal. You held off for some time. Why did you hesitate so long?
Well, it wasn't a question of hesitation. Jack left us at the end of August, and we were in deep mourning and shock, and there was no way to start structuring that from one day to the next. And I also wanted to make sure of two things: that I had pan-Canadian support, and I was able to illustrate that with the presence of Lauren Nystrom, a 32-year NDP MP, very respected figure in the party from the West. He's from Saskatchewan. And I had the current president of the NDP from New Brunswick, a wonderful guy named Dominic Carty. So that was a good illustration that we were building up a team across Canada. I've got a fabulous team in British Columbia, and we're working hard to build things up in Manitoba and Alberta. Ontario is going to be fine. We're going to have lots of great people there. Quebec, of course, is my base, and that's going to be something that I won't take for granted, but I will.
Well, you've got 2 other Quebec candidates.
We've got 2 other Quebec, well, actually, one other that I know of.
Rena Saganash and, Brian Topple's from Quebec.
Well, okay. we're going to work really hard, with our base. And Atlantic Canada is going to be fun too, because it's a dynamic region, and it's one that has a lot of strong NDP roots, and we're going to be doing our best to build there as well.
I don't want to put too fine a point of it, but it'd be stupid not to ask a question about it. A lot of people in the NDP establishment are not backing you. Quite a few of them are backing Brian Topp, some are backing others. What do you think is the issue?
Look, all I can answer to that is the fact that when I was on the stage last week, I had 33 of my NDP Member of Parliament colleagues from caucus who were giving me their support. That, for me, is my best calling card in this campaign. The people who are actually elected, who've been through the process, know what it takes to get elected. Not just from Quebec. I had senior Ontario people like Wayne Marston, who's a respected union leader, John Rafferty, a wonderful colleague out of Thunder Bay, and I have a couple of the young rising stars like Matthew Kelway, who won in Beaches, and Dan Harris, who won in Scarborough. Those are the type of people that are the future of the party, and they've offered me their support, and I'm so proud of that. So the people who have actually been elected, who understand politics and the political process, they've given me their support. I have many times more political support from the elected officials than all of the other candidates combined. So that's a good news for my campaign, and it shows that we have that strength and support. The institutional behavior of those who would go back in time and look at the way things were, I think that I prefer to look at what Jack accomplished. Jack brought us to a summit that we had never even gotten close to in the history of the NDP, and he did it by hard work. I've never met anybody who's worked harder. And he did it by determination and by putting together a systematic offer. In Quebec, it was a particular breakthrough, but that orange wave was forming in the rest of Canada on May 2nd.
I like that. That's an interesting phrase, systematic offer. What's a systematic offer to English Canada?
I think that we have to do the same thing. We have to say that we're serious about sustainable development. We're serious about Quebec's place in Canada. I mean, that's something that you have to stand up for. You can't just say one thing in Quebec and then something different in the rest of Canada. You've got to say, this is a special place that we want. It's not going to require the type of constitutional scars that we went through in the past, but we can do a certain number of things. Protect French in the federally regulated workplace in the province of Quebec. We can make sure that we're fighting to keep Quebec's proportion of seats in the House of Commons. If you have this special recognition and it's been unanimously adopted, you've got to start giving it some real content at some point. So that's the type of thing that we can and should be doing and continue to be doing. Bilingual judges in the Supreme Court. If you're about to go to the Supreme Court today, you were there when the Official Languages Act was adopted. And if you've never given yourself the trouble to even think that it would be important to learn how to read a document in French, well, then maybe you should leave that place to somebody who has learned both official languages at least enough to be able to read a document or to understand some basic pleadings. I went to law school in Montreal with lots of colleagues who came from outside the province and indeed from the States, who at the end of their course of study had no trouble reading French or understanding it. So I mean, it's not the end of the world.
You're going to have to convince a lot of Anglophone New Democrats to vote for you in this leadership contest. What's your plan?
Travel, meet with as many people as I can. I mean, this week I'm traveling to Edmonton, Alberta to deliver the Peter Loughy lecture, and it'll be on sustainable development, and it'll be a good place to be giving that lecture. Again, I won't say something different about the tar sands in Edmonton than what I'll say in Montreal. I'll be traveling to BC quite a bit during the campaign. It's going to be a key province for everyone.
Sure.
So, I mean, that's all you can do and then you structure with smart, capable, experienced people who know about building membership bases and keeping in touch with people and remembering to get in touch with them so that they'll vote. And that's what we can do. We can build in civil society. I'm still very close to a lot of the environmental groups. They've been giving me great support over the years. And others will have their interest groups that will back them, and I'll work with those in civil society that I've worked with over the years and hope to produce a good result where the NDP can, for the first time in its history, form a government and actually systematically put in force what we've been talking about for so many years.
You keep coming back to sustainability, a concept for which I have enormous respect and sympathy, and that means an awful lot to me. But in 4 years' time, Harper is going to go to the polls and he's going to say, I provided strong leadership, I kept my hand on the economic tiller through bad rough times, I put the criminals in jail. Is sustainable development going to provide the emotional response that you need.
There's a connection with what we're saying, and it has everything to do with the type of Canada we want for ourselves and for our kids and for our grandchildren. I get to say that now that I'm a grandfather. And I think that if we connect with people, that it's real, that we're going to do it, yes, that will carry a lot of weight. We're not going to scare people away with programs and ideas that simply talk about what we're going to spend money on. We're also going to talk about where the money's going to come from and how we're going to manage responsibly. And that's going to be key to anything that we do in terms of an offer to the public in the next election.